Hello, this is Dr. Victoria Scriba speaking to you from the Seeds of Transformation Healing Center in Wareham, Massachusetts. And today we're going to do the astrology chart, Kabbalah, and numerology of the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. This was a request by Roberta, so here you go, Roberta. So the first thing I like to do is I like to look at a chart without actually anything in it. I like to get the information I can from sort of the skeleton of the chart. And the skeleton of the chart is the four pillars, okay, or the four areas of the chart that describe who we are, who we relate to, where we come from, and sort of what's our persona in the outer world. And so we look at the ascendant, and Aretha has a Scorpio ascendant. Now, Scorpio is the sign that is ruled by the planet Pluto, and in evolutionary astrology, Scorpio is the soul. And so people who have Scorpio ascendants are pretty much soul first, as it were. The ascendant is how we approach life. It's the skin that we're in. It's our instinctual way of being. When you have a Scorpio ascendant, your instinctual way of being is deep, psychological, secretive. So this is somebody who is somewhat of an enigma. We might not have... we all had a sort of a deep sense in our own souls of who this person was, but we didn't really know who this person was. And so that's usually... there's a magnetic attraction with Scorpio, so we all felt magnetically attracted to her. And there's an intensity with Scorpio, and she did not have to be the most beautiful person to attract that kind of attention, because there's a depth to it that's not that cannot be necessarily experienced by just seeing the visage of somebody. Not that she wasn't an attractive woman, because she was, but it was a different kind of attraction. It was a different kind of beauty. There was a depth to her that we could feel in our own soul. And so she became the Queen of Soul, and she has her MC up here in Leo, and your MC is how sort of you're perceived by the populace. It's the highest point of the chart, and of course there's a regality to that. And so people who have Scorpio ascendants and MCs in Leo, they tend to have that sort of depth and regal demeanor, and so we certainly have that, and she was known as the Queen of Soul. So just by that alone we can see that that we're dealing with a very powerful person. Okay, so let's look at where Pluto sits in her chart. Now, as an evolutionary astrologer, we look to Pluto first, but even if we weren't doing evolutionary astrology, we might look to Pluto first because she has a Pluto ascendant. So let's see where Pluto was. And she actually is of the Pluto and Leo generation, and she had her Pluto up here in the 9th house. Very powerful position for Pluto, and she had it at about 4 degrees of Pluto. 4 degrees of Pluto, 4 degrees of Leo. And so she came in the generation of somebody who felt like they had a special destiny, something that they had to share with others. And she has it in the 9th house. And the 9th house is the house of religion and the house of spirituality. It's also, the 9th and the 10th house are the most evident, really. They're at the top of the chart. And so she had a deep faith, perhaps. And she did come from a religious family. Her father was a preacher. I believe they called him the preacher with the golden voice or something. I'm not sure if it was because he sang or his voice, his actual speaking voice. I have to, full disclosure, I only know bits and pieces of her biography and what I've seen on the TV. I'm not a student of her life, but I am a lover of her music. So and I know what I feel when I hear her music. Okay, so in order for her to evolve as a soul, and as all Pluto and Leos to evolve as a soul, they need to move in the direction of their polarity point. And in the case of Leo, the polarity point is in Aquarius, and in the case of Aretha, her polarity point was in the third house. And so Pluto in the ninth house is somebody who believes what they believe. There's a faith there. There's a search for truth. But a lot of times, finding the words to express that truth becomes a challenge, because you know so much. How do you bring it down to the common people, really, which is more what we're dealing with in the third house? How do you bring it to the neighborhood? How do you bring it from the higher realms of spirit, which is often associated with Sagittarius? The highest mountain, right? Amazing grace. How do you bring it down to the folk, as it were? And in Aquarius, it has to be there has to be a sense of equality. So that is the driving force of her soul to evolve in that direction. And she certainly did become. She certainly did represent the common folk. Experiences through her music, through her life. She was very much a person who was interested in civil rights. She sang at Martin Luther King's funeral. She sang at Barack Obama's inauguration. All the really important points, certainly in the history of blacks in America. She was always sort of a touchstone. So for that, and it's in her soul there, and in the expression of her soul. So your Pluto is actually where you, it's your unconscious drive, your unconscious desire. Now, it could be said that people who have Pluto ascendants, who are more evolved Scorpio types, have more of a connection to their soul. Their soul is right up front. And so these things I'm saying about her soul are generally unconscious drives, but she was driven sort of by those unconscious drives to a certain extent. So what we are conscious of, however, is the nodes of the moon. And so the nodes of the moon give us the story, the backstory, so to speak, of where we've come from and where we're being required to move. And so we have, she has her south node, which is the past, which is the past, and she has it, so she has a south node in Pisces in the fourth house, and it's 13 degrees 7 minutes. No, it's 13 degrees 13 minutes, I'm sorry. And it is direct. The nodes, this is the true node. The nodes are generally retrograde. They're retrograde, I think, 80% of the time. So when people have nodes that are stationed or nodes that are moving direct, there is a quality, a special quality. Now, I've read that these people come to prominence in their as they get older, but I can't say that is true of Aretha because she was a child prodigy. So we have her south node in Pisces in that fourth house. The fourth house again is the family. She has Aquarius on that on her fourth house cusp, and Aquarius is unusual. So there was something unusual about her family. But Aquarius is also tribal. There's a tribal energy to Aquarius. And so it's the kind of energy where maybe she was raised by any number of people, not just her mother and father. And her mother did leave her father when she was young. But I'm sure that there were aunts and grandmothers and people within the parish that she came from that helped to raise her. So part of her journey was having that South Node in Pisces is that she was really connected to Source, okay, God, Goddess. She would probably say God, and she started as a gospel singer, so that sort of goes along with that. But with Pisces, we also have chaos, and so this can be a very chaotic situation. She could have felt like she was, sort of in the soup with this. Now, her North Node is in Virgo, up in the 10th house, and when you have a North Node in the 10th house, part of your journey is to become an authority in your own life. And she certainly took the reins of her own life, okay? And she did it relatively young. She moved from gospel into popular music, and she took the world by storm. When you have your North Node in Virgo, you need to make a lot of adjustments in your life. You need to look at life very realistically, and so there is that part. The North Node in Virgo, sometimes you can have physical issues, difficulty with parameters, because in Pisces there are no parameters, there are no boundaries, and so she had to learn how to create her own boundaries in her life. So the ruler of her North Node the ruler of her North Node by sign is Mercury, and she actually has Mercury at 13 degrees of Pisces, 7 minutes. So it is exactly pretty much conjunct her South Node. When you have the ruler of the North Node conjunct the South Node, you have some things that you have to resolve, okay, some things in the past. So the past is right there in your life, and there are things to resolve, but it also has to do, your South Node holds your talents and abilities, and she certainly had the voice of an angel, but an angel that knows what it feels like to have pain. Okay, so we have the ruler of her North Node conjunct that South Node in Pisces, and there's her history of being a gospel singer, and her history of being raised in the church, and then her ultimate history of taking that talent that was procured there, and through many lifetimes probably, and bringing it up so that we could all enjoy it. And of course, Virgo is very much the common folk, and Virgo is also connected with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement took flight, so to speak. I mean, it didn't start in the 60s, but that's when it really sort of, we'll say, blew up and became into the consciousness of the collective on a massive scale. And that was at the time when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct in Virgo. And so that energy and then of course that Pluto-Uranus conjunction that occurred in 1965 and 1966 actually occurred close to her North Node, but occurred in her 10th house. And so she became a symbol, in a way, of that struggle through her voice and through her activities, her own humanitarian endeavors. Okay, so the ruler of her South Node is in Virgo, up here in the 11th house, and Virgo and Neptune are kind of antithetical to each other. Neptune is no boundaries, oneness, wholeness, and the Virgo is discernment and boundaries and figuring things out and improving. I mean, how do you improve on perfection, really? But we can see that whenever you're dealing with Pisces, the energy of Pisces and the energy of Virgo, which she has in spades here, we're dealing with issues of victimization, forgiveness, and the ability to sort of transcend that victim-victimizer role. Ultimately, it's about transcending that and releasing and letting go. So, and it was again in the 11th house, which, so that Neptune in Virgo connected to the 11th house, and the 4th house connected to Aquarius. So there's a connection there through Aquarius, through tribal energy, through the family. And also Aquarius deals with trauma, and so there is trauma within the family dynamic, and not unusual in Black America, because it was traumatic to be Black in America. So there is that connection as well. And she had 4 children, 4 boys actually, and her first son was born when she was 12, and her second son when she was 14. So this is a very young age to have children, and so there can be challenges or questions around who exactly were the fathers of these children. I mean, there is something said who the father is, but there are also rumors, and that's all part of the whole Scorpio part, the enigma, the secrets, the family secrets, which is not really all that unusual, unfortunately. I watched a PBS special where they said that 1 in 3 girls are sexually abused as children, and 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused as children, and most of the people abusing them are either family members or friends of family. So they're not strangers generally. So that's another layer of suffering, perhaps, that was expressed within her own music and her voice and such. So we have that. Now we also look at, not only do we look at the ruler of the South Node and the North Node by sign, but we could also look at the ruler of the North Node and the South Node by house. And so let's start with the South Node, because we'll look at the history. And the South Node, the house of the South Node, is Cancer. Cancer is the ruler of the South Node, and we have Cancer up here in the 8th house at 17 degrees of Cancer, 29 minutes. Cancer, the Sun in Cancer is very sensitive, but it's in Scorpio's house, so it is very, not easily, even though you feel it, you may not show it. And her mother actually died when she was relatively young. Her mom was, young, and so she was young when she lost her mother. And it's not unusual to have the moon in the 8th house and you lose your mother. In the case of her, it was death. First, it was her mother left her. She stayed with her father in the church because I think her father was a philanderer, so the mother left. The mother did visit her. The mother did, was part of her life until she was tragically had a heart attack. I think she was only 50 years old when the mother was 50, but it could have even actually been younger than that. So that's almost like 2 deaths of the mother. And so we can see again this depth of suffering and this depth of loss that she had experienced in her life, and quite young. And so that's connected to her South Node. So your South Node, you spend your pretty much first 28, 29 years in your South Node, because you tend to be, that's the family karma that you're dealing with, and this is big family karma here. So, and then once you move into your North Node, you start to mature and you start to take you take the I'm so sorry, the reins of your own life. Okay, so we can see that passed there with the moon there in Cancer, in that 8th house. Now the ruler of the 10th house is Saturn, and we have Saturn here at 24 degrees of Taurus, 56 minutes. And Saturn in Taurus is taking responsibility of your own money. And I believe I heard that she always needed to be paid ahead of time, and she had to be paid in money, in cash. Like, that was it. So she wanted, show me the money right up front, right there. And, you know, she wasn't, she made a lot of money in her career, certainly. And I believe they say at the time of her death, she had, I think, $80 million. I think that's worth $40 million, which I know is a lot, but $1 million, millions and millions of dollars. But she didn't have a will, which is interesting. So that's interesting that she chose not to you know, do the will thing. Maybe she denied the fact till the end that she wasn't going to die. You know, Scorpio is reinventing yourself, dying to the old and being born to the new. And so a lot of the Scorpio energy do have a capacity to sort of come down from the weakest state into a more powerful state. But of course, she did have pancreatic cancer, and so she that was the thing that sort of took her out. All right, so let's look at her sun, because, you know, most people look at the sun in astrology. Evolutionary astrologies do too. They also look at the sun. Because your sun is your life purpose. Your sun is sort of the gravitational. It's the gravitational force that holds it all together. The sun holds it all together, and we have a sun in Aries. Okay, and it's let's see. She had her sun at 4 degrees of Aries, 51 minutes in the 5th house. And so the sun in the 5th house, first of all, loves being in the 5th house because the 5th house is the Leo house. And the sun is exalted in Aries. It's actually, in a way, more powerful in Aries. And Aries is about being a pioneer and starting something new. And so she was the embodiment, really, of the pioneer, the embodiment of creativity, the embodiment of fire, right? And so we have a lot of there was a fieriness to her. I'm only going to guess this because I'm not really sure, but I would guess that she had a temper, and I know I've read or heard that she was a diva, and she certainly had the talent to back it up. So it wasn't, she just wasn't being a diva for being a diva's sake, but she knew that she had a place in this life, in this world, that required her to completely become the energy of her chart. And so I find that people who are very, very much famous generally really embody their chart, and she certainly did. Now let's just look at a few other things going on in her chart, and then the last thing I want to do is look at what was going on the day that she passed and how that was seen in her chart. So we'll just fill some other things up. So she has actually, I want to put in, so we have the sun, we have Mercury, right? We've talked about that. Let's talk, and we talked about the moon. So the other planets, the other personal planets are, she had Venus in Aquarius in the 3rd house. And she had it at 21 degrees of Aquarius. So she really did love the tribe. She really did love humanity. She was a great lover of humanity. She had Mars at 11 degrees of Gemini, 11 minutes. Mars in Gemini, you can be a little bit schizophrenic when it comes to, doing two things at once, always sort of going in two directions. But what's interesting about this is that her Mars was actually square the nodes of her moon. So she had something called planet square the nodes. She also had Jupiter at 15 degrees of Gemini, 4 minutes, and that was also square the nodes. Mars and Jupiter as a conjunction, which it was, is, bigger than life, right? And so things are bigger than life. Now, the resolution node, which is something that evolutionary astrologers talk about, in the case of these two planets square the nodes, was actually the south node. And so for her, in order to completely evolve and sort of move into the direction of her north node, she had to look to the past and resolve some of the emotional things, the beliefs that she had, and the way she expressed her energy. And so she was very, very successful, but I think the place that she probably was, the place that she perhaps maybe wanted to be a little more successful, or that there was room for improvement, had to do with her physical body. She did have weight issues, and that in itself is not necessarily it doesn't mean that she's not accomplished, or that she's not, it's not about the weight, but it's about the health of the physical body. And when you hold that kind of weight, a lot of times you will have physical problems, especially things like pancreas and spleen and just that whole digestive area, because it to a certain extent it gets overworked, right? Because you're always trying to fill the hole, so to speak, right? So there can be some challenges, and I feel as though, perhaps there was some problems with men, Mars, and beliefs around men, and maybe even beliefs around her father. So, I'm not going to get into that really, because she was an enigma, and it was her private life, and she kept it private, and I respect that. But we can see where there could be issues with that. And so just something I wanted to point out. She also had Uranus in that house. She had it at 27 degrees of Taurus, 26 minutes. And so she had a lot of things in that seventh house. Saturn, Uranus, and they were conjunct. And Saturn is about structure, and Uranus is about blowing the structure apart. So being conjunct, there could have been, and again, I can't say for sure about her life, but there could have been periods of times where she related to people that brought both structure to her life, and then ended up blowing it up and having the rug pulled out from under her, which is not unusual when you have Uranus in that seventh house. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else I want to mention. I think I have all the planets. The only thing I haven't really put in is Chiron. And we have Chiron up here in Pluto, and it is at 9 degrees of Leo. And so there was a wound around her ability to express herself. And she did, one of her biggest, or maybe her first big hit was respect. And that's what this is. This is what Chiron conjunct Pluto in Leo. You're going to respect me. You're going to hear my voice, right? Think what you're going to do to me. That song. I feel like a natural woman. To a certain extent, there was a real empowerment of women which I haven't really spoke about, but there's definitely that in her music and in her song, and I feel that that's the Virgo part up there. Virgo earth, the earth signs are feminine. The water signs are feminine. Fire and air are masculine. And so she really sort of raised the bar. In her own ability to become Queen of Soul, she actually gave women the power to be their own personal queens of soul. We really lost a beautiful soul with her. So the next thing I want to do is just look at the transits at her time of death, just to kind of look to see what was being activated in her chart and maybe get some perspective on that. So I'll be right back. Alright, so now we're going to look at how Aretha Franklin's, the day of her death, manifested in her chart. And one of the things that I've read and somewhat experienced by looking at, I'm not an expert at death charts, but I have read that that Jupiter is generally the most active planet in a chart of somebody who passes. Jupiter is the archetype of expansion and freedom, and perhaps there's nothing more freeing than passing away and moving into the higher realms, to be back with spirit, or back with our souls, or back with our soul family, or back with God, or back with Jesus, whatever it is that you ascribe as far as your spirituality. But there is a sense of, returning home with death. And so actually on the day that she passed away, which was the 16th of August, Jupiter was actually right here, and it was at 15 degrees of Scorpio, 19 minutes. So it was right on her ascendant from the 12th house of the Pisces house, which is the being on Jupiter in that house that house is the veil, right, between the living and the dead. And so she had Jupiter there, and Jupiter had been there for about a year. So this has been a process for her, a process of expanding her consciousness into connecting with God, connecting with spirit. So, and then ultimately leaving the body as Jupiter approached her ascendant. Neptune is also connected to that sense of dissolution, and at the time of her death, and even now, Neptune and Jupiter are in a trine with each other. And so Neptune was actually here at about 16 degrees of Pisces, and it was conjunct both her south node and her Mercury. Okay? And so this is another sense of, going back home, Pisces dissolving, and perhaps ultimately forgiving the past. Neptune is about forgiveness and letting go. And so perhaps this was a process for her, and again, we don't know because she's so private, of releasing the past and letting go. The nodes of the moon are also active at any fateful time, and so so we can see that her nodes were activated by Neptune, okay, conjunct the south node, Mercury, and opposite the north node. But the transiting nodes were also active, and the transiting nodes were at approximately 5 degrees. The north node was at 5 degrees of Aquarius. And so that was conjunct both her Pluto and her Chiron, and her midpoint of her Pluto Chiron was 6, so it was right on the midpoint of her Chiron and her Pluto. So the further evolution is almost like her soul got to be free again to come back in at some point and continue her journey. But there's definitely this sense of release, of letting go of the past, and sort of moving into the future, and again, soul first. So I would imagine that her next lifetime is definitely going to have that energy of soul first as well. I just want to see if there's anything else particularly significant. Pluto was at about 20 degrees, actually 19 degrees 14 minutes of, and it was in her second house. The second house is the Taurus house. It's the house of survival, so we're going to say 19 degrees, and it was actually opposite her moon. So Pluto was opposite her moon, the physical body. These are all stresses with the physical body, having Pluto there. All right, and lastly, the sun was at 23 degrees, 39 minutes. So the sun was on her MC. And so, like in true diva and in true Queen of Souls style, she left when she was at the height of her power. And so, thank you, Aretha, for your beautiful voice, for your soul, for the work that you've done for everybody, including blacks and women, and just easing our path and giving us the strength to... I didn't expect to cry, I'm sorry. To be strong. You strengthened us. You were the touchstone for many of our deepest and most transformative times in our lives. So thank you for that, and you are a truly great soul. And namaste, Aretha. Namaste.